On this part of the course, we're going to use the furniture template to create a reception counter, and then in the next class, we're going to have a look at how we can add parameters to that counter to actually make it dynamically adjustable inside the project. So I'm going to start clicking on New, Family, and then go down to Metric Furniture and open. Now this is called the Revit Family Editor. You can see it looks pretty much the same as Revit, but if you look at the top at the menus, you'll see that there are different options presented to us than inside Revit. Also under the project browser, we don't have plan views. We have a reference level, and instead of elevations, we have a back, front, left, and right view. We also have these two lines, which are not actually lines, but reference planes. Now to explain to you how this works, I'm just quickly going to open another type of family template called a conceptual mass. And you can see this is in 3D, and we have those same two lines. So if I go to the floor plan view here, you can see we have the same lines here. But if I look at this in 3D, you'll see that when I select them, these are actually not lines, but two-dimensional planes, and they act as surfaces that you can use to draw things on. So think of them as paper standing in 3D space that allows you to draw on them from the side. Back to this one. The best way to approach creating a family in Revit is to start by building a scaffold of reference planes. And then once you've built that, you can link your geometry and your parameters to the scaffold of reference planes. As a rule, we try to never link any parameters directly to voids or solid objects. We always try to link a parameter to a reference plane and then link your geometry that you create to the same reference plane. So with this one, we want to create an L-shaped counter. So I'm going to start like this and draw out our basic shape. Now we can add parameters later to actually change the sizes. I'm not worried too much about this at the moment. So this gives me my basic L shape. And then I also need to add parameters that controls the heights. So I'm going to go to my front view and create a reference plane for the height. One for the bottom. We're going to have a foot piece down here. And I'm also going to create another two that will eventually control the thickness of one of the elements on this counter. Once these are all created, I'm going to go back to my reference plane. I'm going to start by doing a extrusion, a solid extrusion. Make sure it's on line. What I'm going to do is draw exactly on top of these reference planes that I created as a scaffold. Now I need to make sure that this extrusion will be locked to the actual reference planes. So I'm going to move these lines and then snap them back to the reference plane. And then click on the little padlock that appears once you do that, just to lock it to that reference plane. So I'm done. Now I need to connect it to the height reference planes as well. So back to this view, I'm going to drag it up, click on the padlock, drag it up to this one, and click on the padlock. Now I need to create the footing. So for the foot element, I'm going to go back to the reference plane, create another extrusion. I'm going to do an offset of 100 mils and use the pick line here and pick these lines to create this shape. Say OK. Now back to my front view. It's already locked to the reference level at the bottom here because it was drawn on that one. So all I have to do here is lock the top of it to the reference line down there. There we go. Let's have a quick look in 3D. Okay, now let's start carving away to make this more interesting. And I'm going to use a void for that. From experience, I can tell you that Revit works best as a subtractive modeling application, meaning it's easier to start with a solid shape and then start subtracting from it what you don't need than to build using basic solid shapes. It's also easier to add parameters to voids than to try and add parameters to solid elements that you've built in pieces. So I'm going to use a void extrusion for this one. And I basically want to cut this whole volume away like this. So you can see I'm leaving edges there and there. Now again, later we can add parameters that will actually control those thicknesses there. And say okay. Go to this view again. Just make sure it links to those lines that I created earlier. Let's see how this looks like in 3D. Right. And to finish it off, let's go back to our reference level and create another extrusion. I'm going to create this one just inside. In fact, let's use offset again and pick lines like this. Pick line again, offset, let's make this 32 mils. I'm just going to lock this to the inside there. Okay. I think there are two lines on top of each other here. Let's just delete that one. No, they weren't. Right, back to our front and just lock it to those same reference lines. There we have it. So that's our basic shape, and then in the next class we'll look at actually adding parameters to control all of those widths, thicknesses and heights.